The rain fell hard on the stone streets of London. It was the kind of rain that soaked through worn shoes and thin coats, the kind that made the rich hurry into warm carriages, while the poor pressed themselves against cold walls. Eleanor Hayes stood under the narrow roof of a baker's shop. Her dress was old, but clean. Her shoes had holes that let the water in. She held a small basket close to her chest. Inside was one loaf of bread. It had cost her the last coins she had. She was 19 years old. Her father had been a clerk, a good man, a hard-working man, but he had died 2 years ago. Her mother had followed him 6 months later. Eleanor had been alone since then. She lived in a tiny room above a tailor's shop. She worked as a seamstress. She sewed buttons and mended tears for ladies who would never look her in the eye. The work paid just enough to keep her alive, just enough for bread and candles and rent. But tonight she had no work waiting, no thread to pull, no buttons to fix. She had only this bread and the long walk home through the rain. Eleanor stepped out from under the roof. The rain hit her face. Cold, sharp. She pulled her thin shawl tighter and began to walk. The streets were dark. The gas lamps flickered. Most people had gone inside. Only a few figures moved in the shadows. A beggar, a night worker, a man in a fine coat who walked too quickly to notice her. She turned down a narrow street. It was a shortcut. She knew it well, but tonight, something was different. 3 men stood near the corner. They wore dark clothes. Their faces were hard. One of them saw her and smiled. It was not a kind smile. Eleanor's heart beat faster. She tried to walk past them. She kept her eyes down. "Look here," one of them said. His voice was rough. "A little bird out in the rain." "Where are you going, bird?" another one asked. He stepped in front of her. Eleanor stopped. Her hands shook. She held the basket tighter. "Please," she said quietly. "I just want to go home." The first man laughed. "Maybe she's got something for us. Something in that basket." He reached for it. Eleanor pulled it back. "No, please. It's just bread." "Bread's better than nothing," the man said. He grabbed her arm. Eleanor tried to pull away. Her basket fell. The bread rolled into the mud. "Let her go." The voice came from behind the men. It was deep, calm, strong. The 3 men turned. Eleanor looked up. A man stood there. He was tall, very tall. He wore a long black coat. His shoulders were broad. His face was hidden in shadow under the brim of his hat. But his eyes caught the lamplight. They were sharp, cold, dangerous. "This isn't your business," the first man said. But his voice was not as rough now. "I'm making it my business," the tall man said. He took a step forward. The 3 men looked at each other. One of them muttered something. Then they turned and walked away quickly. Their footsteps echoed down the alley. Eleanor stood there. She was shaking. Her bread was in the mud. Her arm hurt where the man had grabbed her. The tall man walked closer. He bent down and picked up the bread. He brushed the mud off as best he could. Then he held it out to her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him. His voice was still deep, but it was softer now, kinder. "No," she said. Her voice was small. "Thank you." He placed the bread back in her basket. Then he looked at her shoes, at her wet dress, at her thin shawl. "You live far from here?" he asked. "Not too far," Eleanor said. "I'll walk with you," he said. "You don't have to." "I know," he said, "but I will." And so they walked together through the rain. Eleanor didn't know what to say. She had never walked beside a man like this. He moved like someone used to being obeyed. His coat was fine wool. His boots were polished leather. He was not like the men she knew. "What's your name?" he asked after a while. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Hayes." "Miss Hayes," he said. He tipped his hat slightly. "I'm Alexander." "Just Alexander, and no last name." Eleanor thought that was strange, but she didn't ask. She was too tired, too cold, too grateful. They reached her street. She stopped in front of the tailor's shop. "I live here," she said. She pointed to the narrow door beside the shop window. Alexander looked up at the building. It was old. The walls were stained. The windows were cracked. "This is where you live?" he asked. Eleanor felt her face grow warm. "Yes." He was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a card. He held it out to her. "If you ever need help," he said, "come to this address." Eleanor took the card. It was thick, heavy. The letters were pressed into the paper in gold ink. But it was too dark to read. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were not cold anymore. They were something else, something Eleanor couldn't name. "Stay safe, Miss Hayes," he said. Then he turned and walked back into the rain. Eleanor watched him go. She stood there until he disappeared into the darkness. She went inside, up the narrow stairs, into her tiny room. She lit a candle. Then she looked at the card he had given her. The words made her heart stop. His Grace Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford. Eleanor sat down on her bed. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. A duke. She had been saved by a duke. The Duke of Ashford. Everyone knew that name. The Blackwoods were one of the oldest families in England. They had castles, land, more money than anyone could count, and Alexander Blackwood was the head of the family. Young, powerful, unmarried, and he had walked her home. Eleanor looked at the card again. She traced the gold letters with her finger. Then she tucked it carefully into her only book, a book of poems her father had given her long ago. She would never use it, she told herself. She would never go to that address. Men like the Duke of Ashford did not truly help women like her. It had been a moment of kindness, nothing more. But as she lay down to sleep that night, she could not stop thinking about his eyes, the way he had looked at her, the way he had said her name. Miss Hayes. If you're enjoying this story, leave a comment and let me know what you think will happen next. The next morning, Eleanor woke early. The rain had stopped. The sky was grey but dry. She ate a small piece of the bread from last night. It was hard now, stale, but she ate it anyway. Then she went to work. She walked to the house of Mrs. Pemberton. Mrs. Pemberton was a wealthy widow who lived in a grand house in Mayfair. She had many dresses, many coats, many things that needed mending. Eleanor went to the servants' entrance at the back of the house. The cook let her in. "You're late," the cook said. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. "The rain." "Mrs. Pemberton doesn't care about rain," the cook said. "Get upstairs. She's waiting." Eleanor climbed the back stairs. Her shoes left wet marks on the carpet. She hoped no one would notice. Mrs. Pemberton was in her dressing room. She was a large woman with a round face and small eyes. She wore a silk robe and sat in front of a mirror. Finally, Mrs. Pemberton said when Eleanor entered. She didn't look at her. "I have 3 dresses that need work, and a coat. The buttons are loose." "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor said. Mrs. Pemberton waved her hand. "They're on the bed. Take them. Have them done by tomorrow." Eleanor looked at the pile of clothes on the bed. There was so much work there, more than one day's worth. But she didn't say anything. She gathered the clothes carefully and put them in her bag. "And Eleanor," Mrs. Pemberton said. Her voice was sharp. "Yes, ma'am. Don't be late again. There are plenty of other seamstresses in London, girls who would be grateful for the work." "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor said quietly. "I understand." She left the room, down the back stairs, out the servants' door. She walked quickly. Her bag was heavy. Her eyes burned. She would not cry. She had learned not to cry. She walked back toward her room. But as she turned onto the main street, she saw something that made her stop. A carriage. A beautiful carriage. Black and shining. Pulled by 4 white horses. It stood in front of a large building. A crowd had gathered around it. "It's the Duke," someone whispered. "The Duke of Ashford." Another voice said. Eleanor's heart jumped. She moved closer. She couldn't help it. The carriage door opened. A man stepped out. Alexander. He looked different in the daylight. Taller, if that was possible. His coat was dark blue. His hair was black and fell slightly over his forehead. His face was handsome, strong, the kind of face that belonged on statues. But his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, serious. Eleanor stepped back. She didn't want him to see her. She didn't belong here, in this crowd of well-dressed people. She was just a seamstress with a bag of mending. But as Alexander looked out at the crowd, his eyes found her. They locked onto hers. Eleanor froze. He stared at her, just for a moment. Then a small smile touched his lips, so small that no one else would have seen it. He tipped his hat, just slightly, just to her. Then he turned and walked into the building. Eleanor stood there. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought everyone must hear it. He had remembered her. The Duke of Ashford had remembered her. She turned and hurried away. Her face was hot. Her hands were shaking. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why a duke would look at her that way. But she knew one thing. Everything had changed. That night, Eleanor worked by candlelight. She sewed buttons onto Mrs. Pemberton's coat. She fixed the hem of a green dress. She mended a tear in a blue gown. Her fingers were sore. Her eyes were tired. But she kept working. There was a knock at her door. Eleanor looked up. No one ever knocked on her door. She put down her sewing and stood up. She opened the door slowly. A boy stood there. He was maybe 10 years old. He wore a fine uniform, a servant's uniform. "Miss Eleanor Hayes?" the boy asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. The boy held out a letter. It was sealed with red wax. "For you, miss." "I'm to wait for a reply." Eleanor took the letter with shaking hands. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was strong, clear. "Miss Hayes, I hope this letter finds you well. I would be honored if you would join me for tea tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. My carriage will come for you. Yours, Alexander Blackwood." Eleanor read it 3 times. She couldn't breathe. The boy was watching her. "What should I tell His Grace?" he asked. Eleanor looked at the letter again. This was impossible. Dukes did not invite seamstresses to tea. Dukes did not send carriages for poor girls who lived above tailor shops. But Alexander Blackwood had. Eleanor thought about saying no. It would be safer to say no, to keep her head down, to stay in her small world where she belonged. But something in her heart whispered differently. "Tell His Grace," Eleanor said slowly, "that I accept." The boy smiled. "Very good, miss." He bowed and ran down the stairs. Eleanor closed the door. She leaned against it. What had she done? The next day, Eleanor tried on every dress she owned. There were only 3. One was her work dress. Brown and plain, One was her Sunday dress, grey and simple. One was the dress that had been her mother's, dark blue with small buttons. She chose her mother's dress. It was old, but it was the nicest thing she had. She washed her face in cold water. She brushed her hair until it shone. She pinched her cheeks to give them colour. At exactly 3 o'clock, a knock came at the door. Eleanor's heart jumped. She picked up her shawl, her only shawl. It was thin and worn, but it was all she had. She opened the door. A footman stood there. He wore a dark uniform with gold buttons. He bowed. "Miss Hayes, the carriage is waiting." Eleanor followed him down the stairs, out onto the street. The carriage stood there. The same beautiful carriage she had seen yesterday, black and shining. People on the street stopped and stared. They whispered to each other, "Who is she? Why is the Duke's carriage here? She lives above the tailor's shop. She's nobody." Eleanor heard their words. She felt her face grow hot, but she lifted her chin and walked to the carriage. The footman opened the door. Eleanor climbed inside. The inside was beautiful. The seats were soft leather. The windows had velvet curtains. Everything smelled of polish and wealth. The carriage began to move. Eleanor sat very still. She folded her hands in her lap and looked out the window. London passed by. The narrow streets of her neighbourhood gave way to wider roads, bigger houses, gardens, trees. They entered Mayfair, the finest part of London, where the richest families lived. The carriage turned down a wide street and stopped in front of the largest house Eleanor had ever seen. It was not just a house, it was a mansion. White stone, tall windows, columns at the door. The footman opened the carriage door. Eleanor stepped out. Another servant waited at the front door. He bowed. "This way, Miss Hayes." Eleanor followed him inside. The house was like a palace. The floors were marble, the walls were covered in paintings. Huge chandeliers hung from the ceilings. Everything gleamed. Eleanor felt very small, very poor, very out of place. The servant led her down a long hallway. He stopped at a door and knocked. "Come in," a voice said. Alexander's voice. The servant opened the door. Eleanor stepped inside. It was a sitting room, smaller than the other rooms, but still grand. There was a fireplace with a warm fire, comfortable chairs, a table set for tea, and Alexander stood by the window. He turned when she entered. He smiled, a real smile this time. "Miss Hayes," he said, "thank you for coming." Eleanor curtsied. It was clumsy. She hadn't curtsied in years. "Your Grace." "Please," he said. "Sit." She sat in one of the chairs. Alexander sat across from her. A servant brought tea. Real tea. Not the cheap leaves Eleanor bought at the market. This tea smelled like flowers and sunshine. The servant poured it into delicate cups and then left the room. Alexander looked at her. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why did you invite me?" Eleanor asked. The question came out before she could stop it. It was too bold, too direct. But Alexander didn't seem angry. He smiled again. "Because I wanted to see you again." "Why?" Eleanor asked. Her hands were shaking. She put them in her lap so he wouldn't see. Alexander was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with those serious eyes. "Because," he said slowly, "when I met you in the rain, something happened. Something I didn't expect. You didn't look at me the way most people do. You didn't see a duke. You saw a man who was helping you. And when I saw you yesterday in the crowd, you didn't push forward to be seen. You stepped back. You tried to hide." He leaned forward. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Miss Hayes. and I would very much like to know you better." Eleanor couldn't speak. Her throat was tight. No one had ever talked to her this way. No one had ever looked at her this way. "I'm just a seamstress," she finally said. Her voice was small. "You're Eleanor Hayes," Alexander said. "That's enough for me." They talked for an hour, then two. The tea grew cold, but neither of them noticed. Alexander asked her about her life, her work, her parents. Eleanor found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, about the loneliness, the fear, the nights when she didn't know if she would have enough money for rent. And Alexander listened. Really listened. He didn't look bored. He didn't look down at her. He looked at her like she mattered. When it was time to go, Alexander walked her to the carriage himself. "May I see you again?" he asked. Eleanor wanted to say yes, but fear held her back. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "people will talk. They already saw your carriage at my door. They're probably talking right now." "Let them talk," Alexander said. "You don't understand," Eleanor said. "You're a duke. I'm nobody. This will hurt you. Your reputation." "I don't care about my reputation," Alexander said. His voice was firm. "I care about you." Eleanor looked up at him. His eyes were so serious, so honest. "One more visit," she said. "Just one more. Then we'll see." Alexander smiled. "One more, and then another, and then another, until you stop trying to protect me from something that doesn't matter." Eleanor climbed into the carriage. As it pulled away, she looked back. Alexander stood on the steps, watching her go, and Eleanor realized something that made her heart both soar and break. She was falling in love with him. Over the next few weeks, Alexander visited Eleanor 3 more times. He didn't send the carriage again. Instead, he came on foot, dressed simply. He knocked on her door himself. They walked through London together, through parks, along the river. They talked about everything: books, music, dreams. Eleanor learned that Alexander had become Duke at 18 when his father died. He had spent the last 7 years managing estates and attending Parliament and doing all the things dukes were supposed to do. But he was lonely, tired of people who wanted things from him, tired of women who saw only his title. "They don't see me," he told Eleanor one day as they sat by the river. "They see the Duke of Ashford. They see money and power and position, but they don't see Alexander." "I see Alexander," Eleanor said softly. He looked at her. Then he took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her like that. His hand was warm and strong. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm falling in love with you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Your Grace." "Alexander," he said. "When we're alone, call me Alexander." "Alexander," Eleanor whispered. She tested his name on her tongue. It felt right. "I'm falling in love with you too. But I'm frightened." "Of what?" "Of what people will say, of what this means, of losing you." Alexander moved closer. He lifted her chin with his finger, so she had to look at him. "You won't lose me," he said. "I won't let that happen." But even as he said it, the world around them was beginning to notice. Mrs. Pemberton heard the rumours first. The Duke of Ashford had been seen walking with a poor girl, a seamstress, someone who was clearly beneath him. Mrs. Pemberton called Eleanor to her house. "I've heard very disturbing things," Mrs. Pemberton said. Her small eyes were cold. "About you and the Duke of Ashford." Eleanor said nothing. "Do you know what people are saying?" Mrs. Pemberton continued. "They're saying you're trying to trap him, that you're using him, that you're a fortune hunter." "That's not true," Eleanor said quietly. "It doesn't matter if it's true," Mrs. Pemberton snapped. "It's what people believe, and I cannot have a seamstress who is involved in such scandal doing work for me. It reflects badly on my household." Eleanor's heart sank. "You're dismissing me?" "I'm letting you go," Mrs. Pemberton said. "Collect your pay from the cook on your way out, and don't come back." Eleanor left the house with 6 shillings in her hand. It was all the money she had left in the world. She walked home slowly. She felt numb. Without Mrs. Pemberton's work, she had nothing. No other ladies would hire her now, not with the scandal. She couldn't pay her rent. She couldn't buy food. She would have to leave London. Maybe find work in the country. Far away from Alexander. Far away from everything. She climbed the stairs to her room. She sat on her bed and finally let herself cry. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor wiped her eyes. She opened the door. Alexander stood there. "What happened?" he asked immediately. He saw her tears. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" She told him everything. About Mrs. Pemberton. About Mrs. Pemberton. About losing her work. About having no money. Alexander's face grew dark. That woman had no right. "She had every right," Eleanor said. "This is the world we live in. Alexander, you're a duke. I'm nobody. People like me don't belong with people like you." "That's not true," Alexander said fiercely. "You belong with me. I don't care what anyone says." "But I care," Eleanor said. She was crying again. "I care because every time someone looks at me, they see a poor girl trying to climb above her station. They see someone who is using you. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am being foolish. Maybe I should have said no that first day when you invited me to tea." "Don't say that," Alexander said. He took her hands. "Eleanor, look at me." She looked up. His eyes were so intense. "I love you," he said. "Do you understand that? I love you. Not your station. Not your money. Not what you can give me. I love you." Eleanor Hayes, the girl who stood in the rain with a loaf of bread, the girl who works until her fingers bleed, the girl who is stronger than anyone I've ever met. "Alexander." "Marry me," he said. Eleanor's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me," Alexander said again. "Be my wife, my Duchess. Stand beside me for the rest of our lives." "I can't," Eleanor whispered. "Alexander, I can't. You know I can't. Your family would never accept me. Society would never accept me. I have no dowry, no family, no name. I would ruin you." "You would save me," Alexander said. "Eleanor, I've spent 7 years being the duke everyone expects me to be, doing my duty, following the rules, and I've been miserable. Then I met you, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. I felt happy. You didn't save me from those men in the alley that night. I saved you, but you saved me in every way that matters." "Please don't do this," Eleanor said. She was crying hard now. "Please don't make me hope for something impossible." "It's not impossible," Alexander said. "I'm a duke. I can marry whomever I choose, and I choose you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. He opened it. Inside was a ring. A beautiful ring. A gold band with a blue stone that caught the candlelight. "This was my mother's ring," Alexander said. "She wore it every day until she died. My father gave it to her when they got engaged. He was the duke. She was the daughter of a country vicar. No one thought they should marry. But they did, and they were happy. So happy." He took the ring out of the box and held it up. "Eleanor Hayes," he said, "will you marry me? Will you be my wife? My Duchess? Will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Eleanor looked at the ring. Then at Alexander, at his serious, beautiful face, at his eyes that saw her, really saw her. She thought about saying no, about being sensible, about protecting him from scandal. But then she thought about something else. She thought about love. Real love. The kind her mother and father had shared. The kind that didn't care about money or titles or what society thought. And she realized something. She would rather have 1 year with Alexander than a lifetime without him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was Eleanor's first kiss. It was soft and gentle and perfect. When they pulled apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being brave." "I'm not brave," Eleanor said. "You're the bravest person I know," Alexander said. "Are you still watching? Make sure to stay until the end to see what happens at the ball." The news of the engagement spread through London like wildfire. The Duke of Ashford was engaged to a seamstress, a nobody, a girl with no family and no money. The newspapers printed stories, cruel stories. They said Eleanor was a gold digger, a fortune hunter, a schemer who had trapped the young Duke. They said she was too poor for him, too common, too low. Lady Catherine Winslow was the worst. She was a duchess herself, an old woman with a sharp tongue and powerful friends. She had always planned for Alexander to marry her granddaughter, Lady Victoria. Lady Catherine called a meeting. She invited every important lady in London to her house. Eleanor heard about it from the baker's wife. "They're planning something," the baker's wife said. She liked Eleanor. She was one of the few who did. "Lady Catherine is angry. She's telling everyone you're not good enough to be a duchess." "Maybe she's right," Eleanor said quietly. "Don't say that," the baker's wife said fiercely. "You're as good as any of them. Better. Because you know what it's like to work for your bread." But Eleanor couldn't shake the fear. She knew what was coming. She knew that London society would not accept her easily. 3 days later, an invitation came. It was from Lady Catherine. "Miss Hayes is invited to attend the spring ball at Winslow House." Eleanor showed it to Alexander. "Don't go," he said immediately. "It's a trap. Lady Catherine wants to humiliate you." "If I don't go," Eleanor said, "everyone will say I'm a coward. They'll say I'm hiding because I know I don't belong." "You do belong," Alexander said. "Then I'll go," Eleanor said, "and I'll show them." "I'll be with you the whole time," Alexander said. "No," Eleanor said. "I need to do this alone. I need to walk into that room by myself. If you're always there to protect me, they'll never respect me. They'll always see me as the poor girl the Duke had to defend." Alexander looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed. "You're right," he said, "but I don't like it." "I don't like it either," Eleanor admitted, "but it has to be done." The night of the ball came too quickly. Eleanor had one good dress, the blue one that had been her mother's. She washed it and ironed it carefully. She brushed her hair until it shone. She pinned it up the way her mother had taught her years ago. She looked at herself in the tiny, cracked mirror in her room. She looked neat, clean. But she didn't look like a duchess. She looked like exactly what she was, a poor girl in an old dress. She thought about not going, about running away, about disappearing so Alexander could find a proper wife. But then she thought about his face when she had said yes, about the way he looked at her, about the promise they had made. She picked up her shawl and walked out the door. The ball was in the grandest part of London. Winslow House was even bigger than Alexander's mansion. It blazed with light. Carriages lined the street. Ladies in silk and jewels stepped out, laughing. Eleanor walked. She couldn't afford a carriage, so she walked through the dark streets in her old dress and worn shawl. When she reached the house, she climbed the steps. A footman at the door looked her up and down. His lip curled slightly, but he let her in. Inside, the house was magnificent. More magnificent than anything Eleanor had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. The walls were covered in gold. Music played from somewhere deep inside. Eleanor followed the sound of music, down a long hallway, through tall doors, and into the ballroom. She stopped in the doorway. The room was huge. Hundreds of people filled it. Ladies in beautiful gowns, men in fine coats. Everyone was talking and laughing and dancing. And then someone saw her. The talking began to fade. One person stopped and stared, then another, then another. Soon the whole room was silent. Everyone was looking at her. Eleanor stood there, alone in her old blue dress, with her worn shawl around her shoulders. She actually came, someone whispered. "Look at that dress," another voice said. "She looks like a servant. She doesn't belong here." The whispers grew louder. Eleanor felt her face grow hot. She wanted to run, to disappear, to never have come here. But she didn't run. She lifted her chin and walked into the room. Lady Catherine stood near the center of the ballroom. She was a tall woman with white hair and cold eyes. She wore a gown covered in jewels. She looked like a queen. "Miss Hayes," Lady Catherine said loudly. Everyone could hear her. "How kind of you to join us." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. Eleanor curtsied. "Thank you for the invitation, Lady Catherine. We were so curious to meet you." Lady Catherine said, "The Duke of Ashford's intended. Tell me, Miss Hayes, where is your family this evening?" "I have no family," Eleanor said quietly. "My parents are both dead." "Ah," Lady Catherine said. She smiled. It was a cruel smile. "How sad. And your dowry? What will you bring to this marriage?" Eleanor felt the eyes of the room on her. "Nothing," she said. "I have no dowry." "Nothing," Lady Catherine repeated. She looked around at the crowd. "Not a single pound, not a single acre of land. Nothing." "That's correct," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady even though her heart was breaking. "Then tell me," Lady Catherine said, "what exactly makes you think you're worthy of becoming a duchess?" The room was dead silent. Everyone waited for Eleanor's answer. Eleanor looked at Lady Catherine, then at all the people watching, judging, waiting for her to break. "I don't think I'm worthy," Eleanor said. She spoke clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I know what I am. I'm poor. I have no family, no money, no grand name. I lived in a room above a tailor's shop, and I sewed buttons for women who wouldn't look at me." She paused. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked triumphant. "But the Duke asked me to marry him anyway," Eleanor continued. "Not because of what I have, but because of who I am. He sees something in me that all of you can't see, or maybe won't see." And I said yes. Not because I want his money, not because I want his title, but because I love him. She looked directly at Lady Catherine. "You ask if I'm worthy of being a duchess. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe I'll make mistakes. But I'll try. I'll try every single day. I'll work harder than any duchess you've ever known. Because I know what it's like to have nothing. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget where I came from. And maybe that will make me a better duchess than someone who was born to it." The room was still silent. But something had changed. Some of the faces looked thoughtful now, uncertain. Lady Catherine's face was red. "How dare you?" "She dares because she's telling the truth." The voice came from the doorway. deep, strong, familiar. Everyone turned. Alexander stood there. He wore a black coat. His eyes were hard as he looked at Lady Catherine. "Your Grace," Lady Catherine said, but her voice had lost its power. Alexander walked straight to Eleanor. He took her hand. "Lady Catherine," he said. His voice was icy. "You invited my fiancée here to humiliate her, to break her, to make her feel unworthy. But all you've done is prove what I already knew." He turned to face the crowd. "Eleanor Hayes is the strongest, bravest, most honest person in this room. She doesn't need a title to prove her worth. She doesn't need money or jewels or a grand family name. She has something better. She has a good heart, a kind soul, and more courage in her little finger than most of you have in your entire bodies." He squeezed Eleanor's hand. "In 2 weeks, I'm going to marry her. She will be my Duchess, and I will be honored. Honored. Do you understand that? Not forced, not trapped, not settled for. Honored." He looked at Lady Catherine. "Anyone who cannot respect my wife will not be welcome in my home. Anyone who speaks ill of her will answer to me. And I promise you, you don't want that." The room was silent. Lady Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around for support, but no one spoke. No one moved. Alexander turned to Eleanor. His face softened. "Dance with me," he said. "I don't know how to dance," Eleanor whispered. "Not like this." "Then I'll teach you," Alexander said. "Right here, right now, in front of everyone." He led her to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra began to play. A waltz, beautiful and slow. Alexander put one hand on her waist. He took her other hand in his. "Just follow me," he whispered. "I've got you." And they danced. Eleanor stumbled at first. She stepped on his toes. She moved the wrong way. But Alexander was patient. He guided her. He held her steady. And slowly she began to understand the rhythm, the steps, the way they moved together. They danced through the whole song. And as they danced, something beautiful happened. Other couples joined them on the floor, one at a time, until the whole ballroom was dancing. When the music ended, Alexander pulled Eleanor close. "You were perfect," he said. "I stepped on your toes 6 times, Eleanor said. "You were perfect." Alexander said again. "You stood up to them. You told them the truth. You were perfect." Eleanor looked around the ballroom. Some people were still staring, but others were smiling now, nodding. A few ladies even curtsied slightly to her. She had passed the test, not perfectly, but she had passed. "Take me home," she whispered to Alexander. He smiled. "Always." The wedding was 2 weeks later. It was held at Alexander's estate in the country, a beautiful place with green hills and old stone walls. Eleanor wore a dress that Alexander had made for her. White silk with tiny pearls. She looked like a princess. She felt like a princess. She felt like a dream. The church was full. Not as full as it would have been if Eleanor had been a grand lady, but full enough. Alexander's friends came. Some of the ladies from the ball came. Even Lady Catherine came, though she sat in the back and scowled through the whole ceremony. Eleanor's only guests were the baker's wife and the tailor who had been her landlord. They sat in the front row and cried happy tears. The vicar performed the ceremony. His voice was warm and kind. "Do you, Alexander Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Alexander said. His voice was strong and sure. "Do you, Eleanor Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Eleanor looked at Alexander, at the man who had saved her in the rain. The man who had seen her when everyone else looked past her. The man who loved her, not for what she had, but for who she was. "I do," she said. Her voice was clear. "Then, by the power vested in me," the vicar said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Alexander smiled. He lifted Eleanor's veil, and he kissed her. The church erupted in applause. When they pulled apart, Alexander whispered in her ear, "Hello, Duchess." Eleanor laughed. A real laugh, full of joy. "Hello, husband." They walked down the aisle together, husband and wife, Duke and Duchess. Outside the church, the people from the village had gathered. They had heard about the Duke's wedding to the poor girl. They wanted to see her. Eleanor and Alexander stepped outside. The crowd cheered. An old woman pushed forward. She had a simple bouquet of wild flowers. "For you, your grace," she said to Eleanor. "For luck." Eleanor took the flowers. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much." The old woman curtsied. "You give us hope," she said. "People like us, you show us that good things can happen, even to the poor." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Good things can happen," she said. "I'm proof of that." They rode back to Alexander's estate in an open carriage. The sun was shining. The world was beautiful. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked. "I don't have words for how happy I am," Eleanor said. She looked at him, at his handsome face, at his kind eyes. "I love you, Alexander." "I love you, Eleanor," he said. "My wife, my Duchess, my everything." That night, they had a small dinner, just close friends, just the people who truly cared about them. Alexander stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said. 2 months ago I was the Duke of Ashford. I had everything a man could want: money, power, a title, but I was lonely. I was going through the motions of life without really living. He looked at Eleanor. "Then I met a girl in the rain, a girl who was holding a loaf of bread and trying to get home, a girl who didn't care that I was a duke. She just saw a man who was helping her. And in that moment, everything changed." He held his glass higher. "They said she was too poor for me. They said she didn't belong. They said I was making a mistake, but they were wrong. Eleanor isn't too poor for me. I'm not rich enough for her, because she has given me something no amount of money could buy. She's given me love. Real love. The kind that sees past titles and bank accounts and family names. The kind that sees the person beneath." His voice grew soft. "Eleanor, you have made me the luckiest man in England. Not because you married me, but because you love me, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that love." He looked at the guests. "To my wife," he said, "the Duchess of Ashford, the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." "To the Duchess," everyone said. They raised their glasses. Eleanor stood up. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't used to being the center of attention like this. "I don't have a grand speech," she said. "I'm not good with words the way you all are, but I want to say something." She looked at Alexander. "Before I met you, I thought my life was set. I thought I would always be a seamstress. I thought I would always be poor and alone and invisible. I thought that was my place in the world." She smiled. "You taught me that I was wrong. You taught me that my place in the world is wherever I choose to make it. You saw me when everyone else looked past me. You loved me when everyone else said I wasn't worth loving. You changed my life. Not because you made me a duchess, but because you made me believe in myself." She raised her glass. "I don't know if I'll be a good duchess. I don't know if I'll ever truly belong in your world. But I promise you this, I will love you every single day. I will stand beside you through everything. and I will never, ever forget where I came from, because that's what makes me who I am, and you loved me for who I am. To love, she said, the kind that sees past everything else. To love, everyone echoed. And as Eleanor sat back down, Alexander took her hand under the table and squeezed it. She squeezed back. They had found each other in the rain. A duke and a seamstress. Two people who should never have met, who should never have fallen in love. But they had, and their love had changed everything. Years passed. Eleanor did become a good duchess, a great duchess. She opened schools for poor children. She hired seamstresses and paid them fair wages. She used her position to help people like her, people who had nothing. The society ladies who had mocked her learned to respect her, then to admire her, then to love her. Lady Catherine never apologized, but she stopped speaking ill of Eleanor, and when she died years later, she left a note for Eleanor. It said only, "You proved me wrong." Good. Eleanor and Alexander had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. They taught them to be kind, to work hard, to never look down on anyone. And every year on their anniversary, Alexander would take Eleanor for a walk in the rain. He would hold her hand, and he would remind her of the night they met. "Do you remember?" he would ask. "I remember," Eleanor would say. 3 men in an alley, a loaf of bread, in the mud. "And you?" "I knew that night," Alexander would say. "I knew you were special. I knew you would change my life." "I was just a girl trying to get home," Eleanor would say. "You were everything," Alexander would say. "You still are." And they would stand there in the rain, the Duke and his Duchess, the rich man and the poor girl who had become so much more. They would remember the whispers, the cruelty, the people who said it would never work. And they would smile, because love doesn't care about money or titles or what society thinks. Love sees the heart, and 2 hearts that beat as one. Eleanor Hayes had been too poor for the Duke. That's what they said. That's what they believed. But Alexander Blackwood knew the truth. He had always known it, from that first night in the rain. She wasn't too poor for him. She was priceless. She was everything. She was his future Duchess, his wife, his love. And he was the richest man in the world, not because of his money, but because of her. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. And remember, true love sees the soul, not the status.